My first guest broke ranks to become one of the nation's most vocal never-Trumpers. Former Republican Congressman turned Democratic candidate for Florida Governor David Jolly joins me now. I just want to start with the president is trying to paint all Democrats as communists. And as we were talking about, the candidates who won in New York are Democratic socialists. But I wonder, are you concerned that the attack lines will actually sink in with voters and be effective in November?
Not if we have an honest conversation. Omar, the president called Democrats godless communists. This is a president who has depicted himself on social media as Jesus Christ himself. He has suggested repeatedly that he is without sin and has no reason to seek forgiveness. He has profited off the commercial sale of Bibles with his own name. He has attacked the Pope. And as a student of 2 Corinthians, as he likes to say, maybe you should remember the words of chapter 6 that say you should approach others with grace and kindness and charity. This is a president who, if he wants to talk about godliness, should spend more time on his knees in prayer and less time in front of a microphone on his feet lecturing the American people. And Omar, I say that, yes, you can hear the resentment in my voice as a Democrat who speaks openly about my faith. You see, I believe in the saving grace of the Jesus Christ, who I call my God. But I know the responsibility of a president and of a governor is not to share their faith, but to secure freedom. This president is constitutionally obtuse. He's doctrinally heretical. He has manipulated the Christian church for far too long. And bless the old man's heart, he needs to sit down and shut up a little bit on this issue.
Well, Congressman, when you look at sort of how President Trump rose within the Republican Party, I mean, it was a GOP establishment that in many cases tried and failed to contain its own populist wing until the party was completely remade by President Trump. I mean, we're seeing that now. And on the Democratic side, though, we're looking at a situation where Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries is under a lot of pressure to win back the House. But I wonder, from your perspective, should he embrace this progressive wave or distance himself?
You know, you're right. I was a Republican. I was an independent. Today, I'm a Democrat. I'm in a very post-ideological place in my life. I don't care about the left-right spectrum. I think what we're seeing, Omar, is a resentment of incumbents who have failed to address people's pocketbook issues, right? The issues of housing, healthcare, and education that are frustrating people. In New York, you saw an anti-incumbent swing of Democrats rising to beat Democrats. In Florida, we're not concerned about Democratic socialists. They're not going to build a coalition in the Sunshine State. We're worried about Republicans continuing failed policies that are hurting Floridians. And so, look, Democrats are getting elected in Florida right now. The city of Miami just elected a Democratic mayor for the first time in 30 years, and it was by 19 points. Not even close. Mar-a-Lago just elected a Democratic state representative, and if the election were tonight, Florida would elect a Democratic governor. Not necessarily out of ideology, but because people are frustrated with incumbents who aren't solving problems. In Florida, the issue isn't Democratic socialists, it's right-wing Republicans who are failing to address the economic needs in housing, healthcare, and education for the most number of voters.
I mean, the real test in Florida and beyond is going to be energizing the Democratic base, along with trying to get independents as well.
Sure.
And I just wonder, you know, if you look at the so-called big tent of the Democratic Party, which does include the Democratic Socialists, if it means energizing that Democratic base, would you be comfortable campaigning with the Democratic Socialist wing of this party?
I think New York elected the wrong people. But I say that as a Floridian, as a Florida Democrat. I respect that New York gets to elect who they want to elect. Florida's going to elect who they want to elect. Look, we're a party that includes Gavin Newsom in California, Andy Beshear, Abigail Spanberger, Mikey Sherrill, Senator Kelly. We have people who are within our party are representing their communities in very different ways. But the 3 values that I recognize we all share is that we're trying to get the economy to work for everyone. Government can do a little part to improve people's lives, and everybody's rights should be protected and their dignity celebrated, regardless of the color of your skin, where you were born, who you love, or who you worship. Those are democratic principles, and the reason Democrats are getting elected is those are not Republican principles right now. They're not fighting to make sure the economy works for everyone. They're trying to attack government, and they're launching culture wars to divide people. That's why Democrats are winning statewide or nationwide.
But bottom line, you're not worried about this wing of the Democratic Party surging in the same way that we saw President Trump once in the wings of the Republican Party?
I disagree with this wing of the party. That's not who I am as a Democrat. But look at Republicans right now. They have people that tried to overthrow the government, that beat cops. The president pardoned those cops. They're engaged in outright grift and graft and outright corruption in Florida and in Washington. So you want to talk about a party that's having a hard family conversation. The Florida primary right now is like four snakes in a bag. You got Donald Trump's candidate, Ron DeSantis' lieutenant governor. You got the last Jeb Bush standing in the state, and you got Tucker Carlson's candidate. That's a party that's divided. At least Democrats are focused on improving people's lives. Republicans are fighting this culture war within their own organization that they can't figure out. Look, I disagree with many of the candidates that New York Democrats elected, but I'm a Florida Democrat. We do things differently down there.
All right. David Jolly, we will be watching how the election season goes down in Florida, of course. Appreciate you being here.
You bet.
All right.